Well, remember the old Bill Clinton campaign line in 1992? It's the economy, stupid. Well, guess what? Nothing's changed. It's still the economy, stupid. That's what you've told the pollsters is your most important issue. Thursday night, the main party leaders will debate the topic. Tonight, the bottom line is here with a preview. Patty Croft is an economic analyst and former senior banker. Jim Stanford is an economist with Unifor. Preet Banerjee is a freelance journalist and financial advisor. And Amanda Lang is our senior business correspondent. Their thoughts in a moment, but first, this. The most recent numbers say the economy is officially in a recession. Call it mild, call it worrying, call it whatever you want, but it is a recession. So what to do about it and how to grow the economy and create jobs instead of watching it all stall? What would the different parties do? What makes sense? What doesn't? Who's taking risks? Are they acceptable risks? And what's missing from the discussion we're all having? Just some of the questions for tonight, so let's get to the answers. All right, well, you know, we've seen all these polls. Canadians say economy is their number one issue. What is it about the economy that they say is their number one issue?
Well, I think the economy is kind of this big and personal thing, but when you drill down, I think Canadians are worried about jobs, and they're not feeling very optimistic right now. A recent poll suggested that 25% of Canadians think their standard of living is going to decline within the next 12 months. So the challenge of this election is to pick which party is going to provide sustained growth and strong job growth as well.
Jim?
I'm in line with Patty, actually. When people think about the economy, they're thinking about their economy at home, how they're going to pay the bills. And for the vast majority of Canadians, that's all about having a job, keeping a job, hoping that it's secure enough that they can pay the bills. And it's not just the polls about them, it's the polls about their kids. I actually think this actually motivates people with a lot of emotion, which is important in elections. But people do not feel that their kids are going to have the same chance in life as they did, and their chance of finding a decent job is the number one problem there.
Well, the parties have been out there, you know, making their pitch for 5 or 6 weeks already now. Do you think they get that, Preet, what Canadians are thinking?
Well, I mean, they come out with their promises as they always do, but what I'd really like to see is a long-term vision for innovation. So let me give you an example. I believe that anything that can be automated will be automated. My first job was working at McDonald's as a cashier when I was 15 years old. And today, when you walk into a number of fast food restaurants, there's a terminal where you pick your meal, you pay, and you take your stub up to the counter and pay. So 10 years from now, my first job as a young Canadian may not even exist. So we need some kind of strategy that takes into account, I'm not even going to say it's a possibility, of that reality.
Amanda?
I think actually one of the biggest weaknesses we've seen in this campaign is not addressing this issue, that people don't feel great. And this, you know, from the governing party, from the Conservative Party, it's been trust us, stay the course, you know, we're the ones who will do it. And I think people, you know, the messaging doesn't really work because people sort of feel, well, okay, maybe the economy's okay and we're not in deficit, but I don't feel that great. And I haven't heard anything really sort of powerful from other parties saying, here's a reason for optimism, that I've got a plan for growth. There's no sort of big vision happening out there.
Well, let's try and analyze what the parties, in fact, have put out there. And what I want, I'm going to kind of put a party to each one of you. And
Purely random.
Purely random. Okay, it won't be so random. You take the NDP, Jim. What I'm looking for is what do you think is their strongest pitch on the economy?
Strongest part of their platform so far. I would say in the NDP's case, it's their willingness to think big on the social programs side of things. You have seen, I know they've been very cautious on the fiscal side, but in the social programs area, they put out some big ideas about modernizing and I think updating our social safety net to reflect the realities of the real world around this. The child care program for national child care would be, I think, very important for working families. Their promise around the Canada Pension Plan, I think, is ambitious and quite appropriate, and I expect Patty to agree with me completely on it. We may hear something from them on pharmacare, another modern social policy that reflects the new era.
All right. I don't know, Patty, whether you do or you don't agree, but before you take that challenge, tell me about what you see as the strongest plank in the Liberal platform as it goes on the economy?
Well, I think the Liberals are the only party that are actually offering something different. And I think Canadians are in the mood for change. And as a result, what they're offering, they're the only party that's offering to increase personal income taxes. It's for the wealthy. If you make more than $200,000, you're going to have to pay more. They're going to cut taxes for the middle class, which may be very popular as well. And they're the only party which has said we will run deficits for the next 3 years, we'll balance by 2019, but we as a country need to invest in infrastructure. And to do that, we're willing to run deficits, not increase national debt, but run deficits for the next 3 years. So that's a very different platform, and I think it's quite bold and offers Canadians a real choice.
Preet, on the governing party, the Conservatives.
Well, I think they're staying the course, and they are on message with, being good fiscal managers, at least holding themselves out to be. And I think some people need to recognize, and that's I think what they're trying to sell, is that there are a lot of external shocks that are responsible for what's happened. And I don't know if any party could have controlled for that. For example, the drop in oil, the U.S. performance, the Eurozone, decreased expectations in China. So would a different policy have worked out better? They're saying no. And I think a lot of people, that message does resonate.
You know, the problem with the external shock argument, of course, is when things are going well, they never credit external issues, right? It's only when things go bad.
That's politics.
Right.
You get the wild card. You get the pick.
Peter, we have spent many a bottom line panel hearing Jim Stanford say deficits are okay and we shouldn't be slaves to budget balances. And so I've got to say I'm surprised that he's not saying about the NDP, that they're kind of boxing themselves in with promises but saying we're going to hit a balanced budget. On that front, I'd say the Liberals are gutsy. They're saying it's not the be-all and end-all. Having said that, I'm just going to throw out the Green Party. No chance of governing. I don't think I'm out on a limb in saying that.
No, and they concede that. Elizabeth May in the interview says
but
15 to 20.
guaranteed annual income and free university tuition are two big, bold ideas. And I would say if that ups kind of the idea generation for the other parties, good for them.
All right. Now the kind of weakest plank in these parties' platforms. This time, Patty, take the Conservatives. What's the weakest plank?
I think the weakest plank, again, is Canadians are in the mood for change, and the Conservatives are saying more of the same. Small government, tax cuts, budgetary surpluses are the way to go. But the fact of the matter is the unemployment rate is still 7%. It's above where it was in 2007. Youth unemployment is 13%, 1.35 million Canadians unemployed. And as Amanda mentioned, the mood out there is very pessimistic. Even before we got the data that confirmed the back-to-back quarters of negative GDP, the polls suggested that fully 80% of Canadians felt we're in a recession, slow growth and poor job prospects. So that, I think, is their weakest issue.
All right, Amanda, NDP.
I think the NDP are weakest on the business side, I have to say. It's where they need to show their bona fides and they need to say, we're not anti-business, don't be spooked the world if we win. And they haven't actually delivered on that. They could actually put forward, especially for small business, a bunch of stuff that would say, we actually get it, we know that this is where the growth is. And instead, they're trying to avoid the big scary stuff, but they haven't actually delivered on saying, we understand what business needs. To Preet's point, business in Canada needs to innovate, and they need help from government to do it. And that involves not just tax relief, but it involves a bunch of actual applied programming, and I'm not seeing that.
They'll be trying to deal with that credibility issue tomorrow when they break down the costing on their various plans. Preet, on the Liberals.
Well, I think when it comes to the Liberals, yes, they're doing something that's very bold, but is it too bold? And again, it comes down to the externalities. So if things start to pick up and Canada's fortunes sort of rise, do they need to run those deficits or not? So that's one of the risks.
But I think they're not being bold enough. I mean, this is just 0.5% of GDP. Is that really going to do an awful lot? The infrastructure deficit in Canada is about $350 to $400 billion. So this kind of pales in comparison. So I don't think they're being bold enough.
Everyone's making a big deal out of this $10 billion annual deficit. But honestly,
nothing.
the debt to GDP ratio would still fall.
Exactly.
You could run deficits that were more than twice as big as that and still just stabilize the debt to GDP ratio.
So you're still pro-deficit, to be clear.
Absolutely, no.
To be clear.
Absolutely.
I'm assuming you all had a chance to see some or all of the interviews with the various leaders last week. And one of the things we did with them, especially those who were running against the Conservatives, was try to get what would they do with certain programs. Would they keep them, change them, or abandon them? So I want to know what you would do. So Jim, you start me off with the child care benefit. What would you do with that?
The UCCB.
Yes.
Which I would abolish that and merge it in with the Canada Child Tax Benefit, the CCTB, which was actually one of our outstanding social policy achievements of the late 20th century. And the researchers have shown that it's very effective at reducing child poverty. And what they call the child care benefit is not actually a child care benefit. It's actually a baby bonus that's paid out to every household. So I would abolish it and merge it with something that was proven to work.
Anybody disagreement on that?
Nope.
You all go for that? Okay, Amanda, the tax-free savings accounts.
On this one, I actually think I would go with the late Jim Flaherty and say it's a great vehicle. It works for people, but $5,500 is the right amount. Doubling it actually benefits a thin kind of slice of wealthy Canadians, and we don't actually need to do that at that cost. I wouldn't abolish it altogether, but I would roll back the increase that we saw in the last budget.
Any disagreement on that?
Oh yeah, I'd leave it. I'd leave it at the
You like it?
10,000?
amount. Yes, and
Is
I
that because
think
you're that wealthy slice of Canadian?
no, but I would cap it at a lifetime of $75,000
That's
to
another way to
$100,000.
rein it in. Right,
So,
absolutely.
and then those people, you know, their retirement is well funded. We don't have to worry about them.
All right, small business tax.
I would leave it at 11%. I see no need to cut it to 9%. I don't see small businesses pounding their fist on the table saying we need lower taxes in order to compete. It's very expensive, and it can also be argued it's a disincentive to grow. If you're a small business and you're being taxed at a low rate, why would you become a medium or large-size company?
Anybody different on that one?
I mean, I would actually come at that a different way. I would lower it, because why not? It's a wonderful thing to do for small business. I would remove the upper limit cap, because literally small businesses don't grow beyond a certain point because they don't want to move out of that tax bracket. That's crazy, but there's a way to manage that that doesn't actually.
But then you'd cut it for every company.
Yeah.
You'd cut
all
it
the
for
way up the scale. That would be
well,
huge.
you cut it for a
9%.
number. You cut it for a number.
Corporate tax rate.
I would keep it the same. So a lot of parties want to raise it in hopes of raising revenues, I imagine. But the literature is pretty clear on this, that when you do that, the revenues, the corporate tax revenues, don't actually go up that much. And if they do, it's only temporary, because it gives them incentive to be more aggressive with their tax planning. If they can hire an accountant for $100,000 a year to save them $1 million in tax every year, they will do that all day long.
Well, one of the reasons they lowered was to try and get corporations to pour more money into creating new jobs. That hasn't really seemed to have happened. It hasn't been going back into the economy. I assume you disagree. You want it up.
I would raise it. In fact, I would actually restructure it, not just raise the rate. I think you could restructure the program so that you're paying a base rate that was higher than today, even going back to where it was, 22% before, but give a giant credit for companies that are actually spending the money, so that for companies that are reinvesting in Canada, their taxes would actually go down.
All right, GST. I love this asking this one because they all ran like a million miles an
Especially
hour
economists, right?
away
Yeah,
from that
ask
one. You know,
economists.
no, we wouldn't touch the GST. Should the GST be touched at this point? Who wants to deal? Amanda?
We are all going to agree, because we're not running for anything. 100%, a consumption tax is the way to go. You can adjust for the lower end of the income scale to make sure people aren't hurt by food purchases. But taxing consumption rather than income, the world over, economists will tell you it's the right thing
So
to do.
they could go back to where it was?
It should go up
7%?
2%. It could go up 3%.
Tomorrow, and it's a huge revenue generator. 2 percentage points is $13.5 billion.
You guys aren't running, that's for
The
sure.
question is now the time to do it? Because, you know, some families are feeling some relief at the pumps, right? So there is some slack there that
Yeah,
could be taken
good
off.
point.
But again, the economy is shaky, so.
But room at the pumps should be taken up with something that's focused on the carbon side of things, I think. So maybe we'll get to that.
Income splitting. Income splitting, Jim.
Income splitting is a terrible program for several reasons. It's very unfair. It's very unwieldy. You actually are going to see marriages of convenience where people hook up to save on taxes, believe it or not.
And have
You
children?
will. No, you don't have to have children.
Nobody has children for
You
convenience.
really think people are going to hook up just for that? Come on.
But I think the undiscussed aspect is on labor supply. This actually is a tax subsidy to withdraw from the labor market at exactly the moment that everyone is saying we need more workers in the labor market, not less. So I would just cancel that program.
Patty?
I think I have to agree with Jim. I hate to do that,
Oh,
but
geez,
I think
twice
it's
already on
it's
this one.
poorly thought out, and I think it does benefit wealthy Canadians. And it was a campaign promise that had to be fulfilled, but it's bad policy.
Like, Jim has an uncanny ability to take something I do agree with and talk me out of it.
Phrase it in a way you have
I
to
agree. It does
disagree with.
benefit disproportionate wealthy Canadians. And there is a feeling of social engineering, but I don't think it's fair to say that's what it's about. It may just be a reflection of how people want to live. People do want to have somebody home with children and somebody in the
a certain part
workforce.
of the conservative base wants to live that
Is
way.
it
but
conservative?
isn't
I don't know.
reflective-
Maybe
it
there are
isn't
NDP and
reflective
Liberals
of
who live
modern
that way
societies.
too.
Yeah.
It's
That's a bit of a
possible.
blanket statement.
And what if
All
you
right.
don't have children?
Time for a quick break. But when we get back, this question. What is missing from what the leaders are talking about on this campaign in terms of the economy? And welcome back to The Bottom Line. Patty, Jim, Preet, and Amanda are all at the table tonight. So when you watch what's going on, I mean, obviously Thursday should have everything on the table, but what have they not been out there discussing that they should be discussing in terms of the economy, this being the party leaders? Patty.
Well, I think what's being missed is a view from 30,000 feet. And what I mean by that is there's no discussion about how to diversify the base of Canada's economy. We've seen what happens when you put all your eggs in one basket in the energy sector, for example. But what about the service sector? We talk about manufacturing a lot. It's only 10% of the Canadian economy. Services are 70% of the Canadian economy. And in the last 30 years, services have provided 80% of the job growth. So the Conference Board has this idea that Canada should become a service sector superpower, exporting our financial and insurance services around the world, for example. But again, that discussion about how to diversify our economy so we don't get into this situation of East versus West is missing.
When, you know, it represents that much, you'd think it'd be a slam dunk for conversation.
I don't hear anybody talking about services.
Jim?
I agree with Patty, and another take on the same, I think, broad issue would be taking another look at business investment and our exports, and how are we actually concretely going to build those over time? The traditional approach has been cut taxes for corporations and they'll invest more, and that hasn't worked. We've seen that. The traditional approach on exports, sign free trade agreements and we'll export more. That hasn't worked either. In fact, Canada's export growth under Mr. Harper's government has been by far the weakest of the entire post-war era, and he signed several free trade agreements. Turns out we have to build Canadian businesses. We have to nurture Canadian firms that actually produce and sell stuff the rest of the world wants to buy. And I think that's another twist on the same point Patty is making. We've got to get beyond the rhetoric and the sort of knee-jerk solutions on investment and export. Jump in and get our hands dirty and think about how we're going to actually do it, like the Germans and the Koreans and the Japanese have done.
Great.
Well, a friend of mine tweeted this out, and I thought it was very poignant. She said that if you're a young Canadian with a career, but you have no family, I feel like no political party cares about me. I thought that was, again, very poignant because there are more and more people in that situation, delaying when they're getting married, having children, and that's a significant part.
No, they're hooking up for income stability.
Well, right. Well, now that Jim's given them that idea, there's probably going to be a twinner option now for that.
Consulting practice on that.
Okay.
No, I mean, I agree with everything. I mean, I think we need big ideas. We need big visions. We need a real shift in where we're going. And so that involves innovation and the future. I'm going to go with Preet. If there's one thing that's really missing, what are you going to do to make young people excited, especially First Nations? There's a population in this country that is young and vibrant and fast-growing. And what are these parties saying to them to say, we've got an idea, come out and support it? And, you know, past elections, you've seen that. We're getting kind of tinkering around the edges here. Let's have bold visions.
You know, one connection, Peter, that would get young people out is to talk about the environment, climate change and so on, which has enormous economic implications. There's been no discussion really of that other than from the Green Party again in this campaign. So that would be another way to reinforce the youth interest.
What are the jobs of the future? What's your son going to be doing? What's my son going to be doing? These are, I think we would all care about that. Servicing robots.
Yeah, and the voter turnout numbers reflect that, right? Young people don't vote in significant numbers.
They don't. But it's trying to engage them on a level that they're talking about. And Jim's idea on the environment, perhaps that's one of them. Thank you all. And thank you, too. Don't forget, the Globe and Mail's Leaders Debate on the Economy is Thursday night. We'll have reaction and analysis from At Issue when it's all over.